Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about why 2022 could be the best season ever for F1, at least in theory. Now, just before we get into why next year could be so good, I do not want to disregard this season. You know, this has probably been the best season in the turbo hybrid era. But as good as this year has been, there are a few things coming into place next year which could potentially trump this season. First off, the budget cap. For those of you that don't know, the budget cap was implemented this year as a way of cutting the costs that teams incur and giving smaller customer teams more of a fighting chance against the giants like Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. The cap for this year was $145 million and is going to be reduced to $140 for next year, going down a further $5 million in 2023. By having a cost cap in F1, it stops teams spending extortionate amounts on car development. I've used this figure before, but I'll use it again. It's an astonishing figure. Mercedes spent $500 million in 2020. I think it's £384 million. I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of money. And essentially, this budget cap allows smaller customer teams to have less of a deficit to the top manufacturers. Haas, for example, only spent $80 million in 2020. That's $420 million difference between Mercedes and Haas, the top and bottom team. Haas are never going to be able to spend that much. And so having a cost cap at $140 million for next year, you know, Haas's normal budget for 2020 it was reduced, but their normal budget is 150. So even Haas would be slightly restricted. That just kind of shows you how much the playing field is being leveled by implementing the budget cap. And essentially what it's doing is it's going to promote more competitive racing, you know, as teams won't be able to fund these huge R&D kind of projects to find these marginal gains, you know, like testing different paints to save weight and different like aerodynamic devices, you know, the flexi wings, that kind of thing. Teams won't be able to invest into that kind of thing because they won't be able to afford it. This means we won't have this kind of Formula 1.5, you know, Mercedes, Red Bull, and then just the rest of the field kind of thing. We won't have that anymore. It will just be Formula 1 full stop, and that's what we want to see. Combining this with the sliding scale aero testing rules, and we should see teams much closer together. And as a massive fan of the sport, I do understand, you know, it's frustrating to see top teams running away with the championship, you know, almost making the bottom teams look a bit like a joke, you know, like what's the point in even turning up? You're not getting wins, you're not getting points, you're not getting podiums. It's frustrating, and I do understand that. And I do have to say, I'm not necessarily complaining, because, you know, I'm a Mercedes fan and I'm a Hamilton fan. I've grown up in a family that's been like that. So for me, since 2014 minus 2016, we can ignore that year. That didn't happen. But I've had a pretty comfortable life. I'm not going to lie. And so for me, it's brilliant to see Hamilton gain all these championships and become the most decorated Formula 1 driver of all time. Hopefully he's got his 8th championship by the time this video comes out.
How about new?
I understand that it's frustrating to see that, because I know that I would be bored if Verstappen was running away with the championship. So I do understand that. And I know fundamentally as a sport, the competition and the performance gap between the top and bottom team needs to be reduced. This budget cap should do that. And hopefully it will promote much more competitive racing where driver skill becomes the main factor rather than car performance, which is what we want to see. The second thing coming into play is the new regulations. And now, as I'm sure you all know, the regulations that were set to come in this year, 2021, were delayed due to COVID last year, and so they're coming into effect next year instead, 2022. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because, you know, we've had a good season this year. You know, performance gains at the top have been much smaller, so it means the rest of the field have kind of caught up a little bit, so the performance gap's much less. However, although this season has been bad, the cars are still crippled by the same thing. It's the dirty air produced from the car in front. Basically, the cars cannot follow. They're just not able to follow because of the effects of the aerodynamics of the car in front. The regulations for next year will fix that, hopefully. The projections that Ross Brawn and, you know, his technical team that have developed a kind of prototype car of what the cars might look like next year have said the figure will be around 40% downforce lost behind another car rather than 80% for this year. So I mean, it's still not perfect because it's around half the downforce, but I mean, it's better than 80%, right? So it's a step in the right direction. The biggest change to the cars themselves is the implementation of ground effects as a key concept in the aerodynamics of the vehicle. Venturi tunnels running underneath the air ducts in the side pods provide a huge amount of downforce without producing the same level of dirty air that we've seen from previous generations, which means cars can follow in corners better. This is the one issue that these Formula One cars have had for like 3 or 4 generations now, and so hopefully this is going to fix it. The aerodynamic surfaces up top as well, the front and rear wing, have been simplified, and this further reduces the effect of dirty air that they traditionally have, and they're less sensitive to it as well because they don't really do as much in terms of downforce. Ross Brawn said that we will still have DRS for at least 1 year with the new generation of cars. This is basically just in case the new regulations aren't as effective as we thought they'd be, and just in case they need tweaking. But if the regulation changes are successful, we won't see DRS for much longer. The third and final thing that, in this video that I can think of that could make the 2022 F1 season the best season ever is the changes in the driver market. As I said in the intro, Kimi's retirement announcement has had huge effects on the driver market. We've got Bottas going to Alfa Romeo. I mean, it's not great for him. It's a bit of a step backwards. But I mean, for Russell, huge. Going to Mercedes to partner Lewis Hamilton. I mean, that's going to be massive for his career. If he can shadow Lewis Hamilton, if he can even beat him. Also, it's nice to see Albon is going to be back in Formula 1 as well. I do think he deserves a seat. He was very good in F2 against Lando and George. So good to see him in the Williams. But something I have noticed that I feel like we're finally seeing this shift towards the newer generation of young drivers in the sport. And I feel like they're finally getting their time in the top seat. I'm just thinking George is going to Mercedes, Lando and Charles, they're doing well in their teams. But yeah, I mean, just going back to Russell, going to Mercedes to challenge a titan like Hamilton is going to be so interesting, and it's going to, I cannot wait to see how that dynamic affects the team, as well as how they're then going to use that and handle the new regulation changes as well. Because I mean, if anything, this is a good chance for Russell to assert his dominance as lead driver over Hamilton, because Hamilton could struggle with the new regulation of cars for all we know. We don't know. So it is going to be very interesting to see how that all plays out. On top of this, the likes of Norris taking on Ricciardo, Leclerc and Sainz being incredibly evenly matched. I'm loving Ferrari right now. They're having a great team dynamic. And, teams like Aston Martin investing huge amounts in their facilities, poaching all the Mercedes and Red Bull facilities. That's going to be interesting. And don't count out Verstappen, right? Even when Mercedes have had their dominant years from 2017 onwards, Verstappen's always been there. He's always been third place. Unless something crazy has happened, then he's been first or second. So never count out Verstappen. I have a healthy respect for him in that he's quick and he's always there. And the new regulations are to promote better racing, right? So if the teams are all fairly evenly matched, we will have faster teams and slower teams. That's inevitable. But surely that makes driver skill the limiting factor. And the cream rises to the top. Drivers are going to need to make sure that they are bringing their A game every weekend, maximising practice, quali, race every single weekend. We're going to see who really is the top dog. Hopefully, this is all in theory that the regulation changes actually work, but I think they will. I hope they will. But it's going to be so interesting just to see how it all plays out. Who actually is going to be the top dog? We don't know. I cannot call it. There's too many good drivers in Formula 1 right now. I think it's going to be one of the younger drivers. I don't see it being Lando, because I feel like he's a bit of a machine with consistency. I'm not going to lie, but he's just, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think he will be there. Maybe Leclerc. Sainz is a bit of a dark horse as well. So yeah, I just can't wait. As you can tell, I can't wait for the next season. So, in summary then, the 2022 season could be the best season of F1 ever for 3 reasons. Number 1, the budget cap. It prevents richer teams from finding extra performance over the smaller teams, so the field's going to be more even on performance. And 2, combined with the new aero regulations, it basically means that racing is going to be closer and cars should be able to follow in the corners, which means that we'll actually have battles between drivers that last more than just a couple corners and then the slower driver can't follow in the dirty air. And then when you add to that the new drivers, the likes of Russell, Norris, Verstappen and Leclerc, all in top teams, it's going to make the races much, much more interesting. And we're going to be able to see who comes out on top. I cannot wait. And I can't wait to see how, the likes of Hamilton fare against them. He's been incredibly dominant, but he's in the latter stages of his career, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and see if he can, keep up with the younger generation, essentially.